All right, welcome back. Another looking for work. If you've got questions, hopefully I have answers. Drop them in the comment box, and I will take my best stab at answering them for you. So, um, I usually have a backlog of questions. I might have a few. I have to look and see if we covered. I know we covered all of them last time, but if I there was one that came up, and the gist of it, and I didn't copy and paste it, but I know it is because it comes up a lot, and that is like occasionally folks will say, not occasionally, it comes up pretty frequently. They will say it's kind of a catch-22 situation for early career developers that you need to have experience before you land a job, and in order to get experience, you need a job. And I push back on that, and here is the reason why. Because you don't need a job to get experience. And that breaks that whole catch-22 scenario. So the way around it, the way around not having a lot of experience and a method to gain more experience is work on passion projects, right? So like a software engineering career is a really, really great career and profession. And it's one of those where you can build projects that the material cost of like building a new project on your computer is next to nothing. It requires electricity, right? You can open up your laptop and you can create a new project and you can work on a solution to something. And frankly, like I used to do a little bit of woodworking out in my garage. To do woodworking, you got to buy wood. And believe it or not, wood is expensive. So anybody that's in the construction industry right now knows even wood that you might think is not that expensive and not terribly difficult for you to, acquire can definitely be a challenge, right? So anybody that's doing any home construction right now knows for whatever reason, I know the reason. It's a long story. It's about a shortage in the supply chain. But that like glued compressed lumber, the particle board that you use to build out most parts of a house if you're not building it with like cinder block or brick, that's super duper expensive right now. It's like more than $20 for a panel, and they used to be like $5-6. So I say all that to say, if you had other professions, other hobbies that would require you to actually invest a lot of money, like you gotta go, there's like specialized hardwood stores that you can go to get the wood to build something, a small piece of furniture or a cabinet or an instrument. If you want to build and hone your craft as a woodworker, yeah, it costs money. It doesn't cost anything to write code, right? You open up your computer, dabble a little bit, work on a project. That's how you can gain experience. You can be, more sophisticated with it by contributing to open source, working for a nonprofit, working on a freelance platform like Upwork, and all of those will give you experience without a job and should be able to help you lead to the experience necessary to gain meaningful paid experience or meaningful paid opportunity, a career. So I wouldn't try not to use that as an excuse, because if you use that as an excuse out of ignorance and not realizing that like it's not a great excuse, folks that know will call you out. Like when people are interviewing for a job and they say that to me, they're like, "Oh, this is terrible. Early career developer. There's no way for me to get a job without experience, and I can't get experience without a job." I'm like, not true. So you lose credibility in your argument, because then I start thinking you're just not being resourceful enough. And that's a main attribute that I'm looking for out of employees, is like resourcefulness. So show that you have that resourcefulness and like work on passion projects. So Matthew asks, great question. Should you focus on one big project or a bunch of small projects? My take on it is this: focus on small projects, really small, like ultra small, meaning a project that you can finish in one, maximum of 2 weekends. And that might be hard at first, because at first you're not really super great. And so it might be hard for you to build something of any real value and use in such a short period of time. But that's the size and scope that you should be looking at, because if you try and build a massive project that might take you several months for you to get going, there's a couple pitfalls that you'll fall into. The first is, as the project gets bigger, it becomes harder and harder for you to be able to troubleshoot and really maintain high quality code. The second is, there just won't be the ability for you to have a really impressive, everything's working, it's fully featured, without a lot of, extra either help with architecture, or without really having a refined understanding of product development to understand how to turn on like feature flags and hide pieces of the UI that aren't ready yet. So it's just way easier to show a small project that's completely polished and is ready to go. It does maybe one thing, it does it well, and it looks decent, and your code is clean and well documented and organized, and the repository has a README, and it's easy instructions for someone to pull it down to get your project going. It's better to show that than it is to show that you've tackled this big, complex game platform or CRM or something else that would take an engineering team a while to build, let alone an individual developer. So I don't mean to discourage folks from working on projects that are bigger. Just make it purposeful. So if you're going to work on a bigger project, do that later once you've landed the job. But right now, if you're actively searching for a job, work on short, small passion projects. You should be able to knock out several projects in a month, so that when I go to your portfolio, if you've been looking for a job for about a month, you've got several projects that I can look at. Not one that's kind of not done in a lot of places, and it's got bugs, and the code base has got a bunch of places that I'm not sure. Did you mean to leave this unfinished? Are you going to work on it later? Do you not realize that that's essential? Like, it's just terrible. It's hard. And I see a lot of newer developers make that mistake. They take on way too much. Again, it's a sign that like you're not quite there with the architecture and those kinds of things. And it's not the best way to display your skills if you're super early. So hopefully that's helpful. That's the way I think about it. The other is very human factor related, which is it's way easier to get something done if it's short. Right? If it's going to take you a day, 2 days max, you can finish it off. The longer it takes, the less motivated we are as individuals to like keep grinding when you get to that part of the project that's not fun anymore. And it's a little like when I was woodworking, I never liked to finish. I never liked painting. Like, I'm build something nice. But then I got to sand it and then prime it and then paint it. And in between, I got to wait several days and need several coats. And it needs a sanding after you paint it with a wet sand. It's like, nope. If I'm going to build something, it's going to look pretty vanilla. Right? It's going to be unfinished, unpainted. That's the part that I do on the assembly line. I cut it and build it. And somebody else needs to paint. Many of us are that way too early on. You might not be the best at like the fit and finish portion. So you may need to, just focus on the building portion and the portion of like making sure you get the right pieces of technology to do the full stack of an application. So another question, Matthew, keep them coming. So if anybody else has questions, please drop them in the comments. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. And the best way to get them to me is to drop them in the comments or to shoot me an email. My email is right by where my name is, which is blocked by the current question, but mike@cccareers.org. So Matthew asks, I still have other languages to learn, a lot of job description looking for React, SQL, and more. Would I put learning on the back burner and build more projects? Yes. So you're gonna notice that like everybody's using different tech stack, right? You got Mean, you got Mern. So just within the React ecosystem and just using Node, you've got well, not just React, but like let's say you've got React with Angular, React with sorry, I don't say it's React. Express with Angular, Express with React, Express with Ember, right? You can't possibly be expected to learn all the front end libraries and be up to speed with all of the backend technologies, whether it's SQL, whether it's NoSQL, if it's NoSQL, all of the different flavors of that. p-value stores and caches like Redis and all on and on and on and on. So what you want to do first is get solid in a language. And then once you're solid in that language, the next thing you want to look for is make sure that you pick either a second language or you pick learning some of the paradigms within the current language that you've learned. So we'll use JavaScript as an example. So for JavaScript, you can program in JavaScript very functional, and you can create functional application, and then you can, and it's really not application, but the code is written in a functional way. Or you could create a more object-oriented and use that paradigm when you're coding, and you can combine the two. So you could have in React, you could have some components that are class, and then you could also have stateless functional components. So you'll want to get good at that, about being able to kind of understand the other patterns that we use. So not just the language, but the patterns. Once you can apply a language and then some common patterns, like the singleton pattern, right? Then you can start distinguishing why it might make sense to use an object-oriented solution, or why it might make sense to use inversion of control, otherwise known as inversion of control is dependency injection. Sorry. So dependency injection, right? So like, why is that important? How does that help? Why is that a pattern that is used in certain languages? You can start learning those things. And then the last thing to learn is the very specific, like, Angular really well, so now pick up Vue or pick up Angular. So that's the direction that I would work in. I wouldn't see job descriptions and then like, okay, this week I'm going to learn a little bit about SQL. And then next week I'll learn a little bit about Vue. And then the week after that, I'll learn a little bit about Ember. Because what you'll find is just a very little bit, and you'll lose that because you're not using it. And so it's kind of a waste of your time to like ping pong around between the different languages and frameworks and libraries, instead of focusing on core concepts, right? Like understanding the pub sub pattern, right? Publishing and subscribing, or observing. Once you get those, then you can figure out inside of each new language you learn where that fits. And that language may have that feature, that language may not have that feature. And you're like, oh, this language doesn't utilize this approach or strategy. That's way more useful than trying to figure out if you can like pad your resume with a little bit of Ruby experience and a little bit of Golang experience, so that you can be able to like hit every single company that's looking for a different thing. Because most companies don't care. They might put that on their job description, but it's just a wish list, and they'd much rather have a well-rounded developer that doesn't have experience in that language than someone that has a tiny amount of experience in that language, which is all you're going to get if you just keep bouncing around early on. You're never going to get a deep sense of understanding of the different libraries and languages and frameworks. So hopefully that's helpful, because I see that a lot. I see a lot of folks that are like, call it thrashing, just kind of like bouncing all over the place, trying to just like pick something up so they can put it on their resume and say, I've got some of this experience. It's not really what they're looking for. It's not what I'm looking for. I shouldn't generalize and say everybody's that way, but I think a lot of developers that are put into the hiring manager position view it kind of the way that I am, which is, if you are a good developer, you will be able to pick up new tools and new languages as long as you have some sort of frame of reference. So that's what I really want to know, is like, what's your current frame of reference? What do you have experience with? Instead of learning something new, how solid are you with the things that you currently know? And then how do we support learning more or learning the new stuff? That's a great question. What else? Any other questions? And again, feel free. We're streaming this live across YouTube and Periscope and Twitch and LinkedIn and Facebook. So on any of those platforms, if you're watching this, just go ahead and drop a comment, and that comment will shoot over to me. It takes about a minute or so in different platforms and stuff. But through the fabulous interwebs that we have, I will get it, and then I can answer. If it comes through late, then I'll save it. I'll cover it the next week. But hopefully that's been helpful. Anybody have any other questions? Or Matthew, if you've got another one, feel free, fire away. it's hard for me to tell if there's anybody, like the stats aren't quite accurate on StreamYard. So if anybody's out there, give me a little hey, hello, a little comment, a little thumbs up, a little like, something like that. That'd be helpful because it might trigger this so I can kind of see if I'm recording this for future people or if there are actually people out there live, because I love the answering questions live. That part is awesome. Resume scanner. Oh, that's great. So Matthew asks, in order to pass resume scanner, I need to have keywords. I don't know people in the industry to give me reference on HRDS. So I have to definitely don't want to lie on a resume and say, okay, so I don't know people in the industry to give me a reference. I don't think you should include references on your resume. So I think you can, don't worry about that. I think if you want to say something like references are available upon request, to me, I think that's a waste of space because it's kind of implied that if they ask you for references, you'll provide them. So I think that that's just a waste of space on your resume. In terms of like having keywords, I think they're valuable. And I think when a lot of people list sort of like what they're proficient at, if they're, you know, they've got some HTML and some CSS and JavaScript experience, a little experience with React. So I feel like if you have those, what I generally do is tell people to list a few of the projects, list something about the project, right? So this is a tool that is used as a web-based calculator to determine, you know, square footage if you're buying tiles, whatever it is. So then you might want to put with that project used SQL, Express, React, whatever those were, and then it'll get picked up by the resume scanners. If you're thinking about recommendations, that's what your follow-up was. Then I think, again, best way is this kind of separate from your resume and not really related to your resume. It's part of just the normal reach out. If they want someone to refer you or if they want someone to give sort of like a testimonial on your behalf, I think you can handle that sort of like separate and aside from your resume itself. And the last thing that you touched on is super important. Don't lie. Lying at the beginning of a relationship is never, ever going to be helpful or useful to you because eventually they're going to find out. And if it's about like, you know, a skill or qualification, something you have, then that's not good. It's not just that you don't have that skill and that could be a problem, but it's also a trust and credibility thing. Like if I can't trust you to just be honest to me about your qualifications for the job, and then you know are willing to lie about the small stuff, what would you do with the big stuff? So, and I think that's how it's a reasonable way of looking at it, right? Is like this isn't that serious, so you don't need to lie about it. Just tell us like what your background is, because when I'm hiring, especially an early career person, I'm not. There's nothing that the person can tell me. Them like, oh, you know that, so now you're a better, you know, early career developer than another person. Where it's like they don't know that, but they have the other attributes that I'm looking for. They're resourceful. They're accountable. They're diligent. They're gritty. They learn things. They're learning agility. They learn things quickly and can successfully communicate their thoughts and their thought process to others. Those are things that are going to be way more important than if you were to like lie and say you've got like experience with Git and you've never used Git before. It's just not worth it. So you want them to understand where you currently are so that they and you can make the right decision about whether or not you're a good fit for the organization, and they can support your growth as much as you can provide like a good amount of productivity and pick things up at a reasonable pace. That makes sense. Yeah. Deep doo-doo would be a good way of describing it. It's also painful at the very beginning because then company is like, they can't really, like if somebody lies to me during an interview, and especially if I figure it out during the interview, then it's like, oh man, game on. Not only am I not going to hire you, but I'm going to torture you for the next 30 minutes or so. And if you tell a whopper, it's likely that the engineer is going to figure that out and start grilling you. So I wouldn't do it. It's going to be no fun. All right. Any other questions? You got 20 minutes. This is not bad. There are two that I'm not sure if I covered previously, and that they're at the bottom of the list. I do remember talking about um, Python. People ask about that all the time, so I know I covered that one. Um, yeah, absolutely. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have additional questions. More than happy to cover those and drop those in the next episode. Thanks. Appreciate you jumping on, Matthew. So one question that has come up fairly frequently and came up a while ago. Again, I'm not sure if we covered this one before, but because I cover it so often, I'm just like, all right, let's just cover it again. How long does it take to find a job? Not that long. And so if it's taking you a long time, don't take it personal, like, oh, they hate you as an individual. You're just not really effective at the process of job searching, right? So if you have to think about like a job, which I often say is like, think of the job search process like a job. You're just not good at that job yet. You want to be good at it because the better you are at the job search process, the faster it goes, right? But it is a process, and it's a numbers game like anything else. And so the more activity that you do that is like high yield activity, things that are going to work versus things that don't really work and are ineffective. So you can be working really, really hard and you're doing a bunch of things that are just ineffective. You're not going to make much progress. On the other hand, if you do a small number of things that are highly effective, you'll make way faster progress. So typically, if you go to like an immersive coding bootcamp, it should take you about 3 months on average to get a job. If it takes you longer than 3 months, your process is probably broken. It's a process thing. Don't take it personal. Fix your process. For a lot of folks, when I make that recommendation, you need to fix your process, they're not willing to do so. So I'm not saying that it's easy. It is work. It is hard work. But if you fix the process, you can usually successfully increase the number of all the important leading indicators of success, like how many folks are responding to your reach outs. How many phone interviews do you get? That would be a key performance indicator. Like if you're getting phone interviews and you're getting on-site interviews, you're really close. If you're blowing those, then you need to work on some of the other mechanics. And it could be because you don't have some of the fundamental skills. And so you just go brush up on those fundamentals, right? Make sure that you're prepared for some of the questions that they're going to ask you that are the more technical questions. And then it's helpful oftentimes to when you're not when you're getting to an interview and you don't think it's the technical, to do a mock interview with someone and have them. And it could be, people will call it like a cultural fit. What I think about it more of is like your personality. It's personality like mismatch, where maybe you're coming across as like super like conceited. For junior, best way to describe it would be that you kind of seem like you know it all. When I ask someone like, how would you rate your JavaScript skills, and they rate themselves as like almost perfect, then it's like, you're super early. Like that doesn't show a lot of emotional intelligence to say that you're almost perfect. And like but yet this is your first job writing code, right? So keep that in mind, that by talking to a more trusted person and doing a mock interview with someone that will provide you real feedback, you'll get a much better sense of where you are. So if that's the problem, and only if that's the problem, then I would say reach out and see if somebody that you know that's in the space can do a mock interview. Treat it like it's a real interview and like prep for it, and then ask them for candid feedback. Just understand that most of the time, if you're interviewing and you interview at a real company, they are not going to give you very detailed feedback in most cases. They don't want the liability associated with you basically suing them and saying like they discriminated against you for some reason. And I know people may not like that, like it's not fair, you should get more feedback, but it's like, doesn't matter. They're not obligated to give you anything. You don't work for them, and so you're not entitled to it. So it does show a little bit of a sense of entitlement if people say, I'm entitled to detailed feedback about my interview. No, you're not. That's not a thing. That's not a fact. But instead, they might look at that as a risk. And so if you're not entitled to it, and if there's any chance of a risk, they might say, well, our policy is just we basically tell someone that we're not selected, and that's the best that we can do. It's like give them a closure to the matter and say, sorry, there's not an opportunity here and right now, but might be one in the future. So you won't, in general, get that detailed feedback from folks. And I know somebody's going to see this afterwards and they're going to post, that's not fair, that's not right, company should be giving feedback, etc. It's like, well, should be, maybe, but I get it. And let's face it, how many times do you like not get defensive when someone tells you something that you don't like to hear, right? So that's why an HR person is not going to call you and be like, hey, just call to let you know, yeah, we're not going to interview you. What do you think that person's going to say? They're gonna ask you a bunch of questions as to why. There's nothing you can tell them to help them understand as to why. So it's much easier to just send an email that says, sorry, you haven't been picked, than it is to like deal with someone who 9 times out of 10 is going to emotionally be frustrated and never feel like the feedback was enough, and always want to like, say, well, that's not true. I actually feel like I am very decisive and resourceful, and turns into like a back and forth versus like, look, doesn't matter, we're not hiring you. So chalk it up as, if you want that feedback, if you want that, you have to create the opportunity for that. So you have to engineer a solution where you're going to get that feedback, and that means you have to practice with somebody that will share with you candid feedback that will be helpful for you in the process. All right. Any other questions? Because if we don't have any other questions, we're going to lunch it up. Got a little Jersey Mike's action going on today. Jersey Mike's is good. Those of you that are in a place in the country where you don't have Jersey Mike, felt bad for you. But it is a franchise. So maybe reach out to the folks and see if they can bring Jersey Mike's to your city. I'm originally from Boston. It's kind of the equivalent of like D'Angelo's. Like back in the day, D'Angelo's is like super old now. So it's like when D'Angelo's was like a little startup, right? You kind of picking them up everywhere. It's not quite like a Starbucks or Dunkin' where it's like everywhere, but Jersey Mike's is good. Solid. All right. That's all I got. See you all next week. Oh, I'll have a guest next week because I'm going to be heading back from San Francisco. So there will be a guest in for me, but I'll be back the following week. And we will do this next week. We will have somebody maybe better than me answering your questions live. So till then, later.